Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel. My name is Bipin Kumar. I work as project coordinator for CSPC. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting virtually and we are all joining from various traditional territories across Turtle Island. I'm joining you today from Regina, which is the traditional territory of Cree, Salta, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We recognize the enduring presence and the resilience of the indigenous peoples across Canada and are grateful for the opportunity to gather and share knowledge on these lands. I invite our attendees to share their own land acknowledgement in the chat as we started. Uh, Before I pass on, introduce the panel, we would like to do a quick demographic poll to understand where our audience are coming from. Uh, and while we are having the poll running in the background, CSPC is trying out a new simultaneous interpretation platform for virtual panels, and we will be people can will be sharing the we'll be starting the simultaneous interpretation, and you will be able to see the captions in different language as well. And if you have any specific questions, this is the first we are trying out this platform, so this is new to us. If there are any technical difficulties, please chat, let us know. And I would like to introduce our moderator for today, David McInnes, founder and senior fellow at the Center for Agri-Food Benchmarking and Benchmarking Principle, DMCI Strategies. I will pass it on to you, David.
Well, thank you, Bipin, very much. And thank you to the Canadian Science Policy Centre for enabling this very interesting discussion we're going to have today. And just a bit about me. I'm from Ottawa, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, and delighted to be with you as your moderator. As you can see, this webinar is being recorded, and we're going to jump in and introduce the panelists and give you a little more structure about how this is going to unfold shortly. But what I thought I would do is let's start with the key question and really why are we here? The central issue that we're going to be talking about today and getting audience feedback and questions and from our panelists is really about how a research innovation system can be best nurtured by data systems. Data is a competitiveness issue, it's a research issue and driver, it's a societal well-being driver, and perhaps among other things, I'm sure we can add into that, but it's critical in this day and age that we understand how best to use data to advance our society as a whole. And the key part of this, and we're going to ask Bipin to bring up a slide here, is should the data systems that we use be best supported by a decentralized or a centralized data model? Bipin, we've invested big in this upcoming graphic, and I just want you to see how we're going to present this, just to give you a bit of a sense of the two models. And it's starting here about the difference between a centralized and a decentralized model. We have a nice view of the coniferous trees. There we are. Okay, so as you can see, there's two different ways that we can look at data systems. One is under the control of a single entity or a centralized model, and this is really about how do we optimize for efficiency and clarity of control, two characteristics or attributes. And then, of course, under a decentralized model, this is best optimized for how to improve resilience and distribution of data and knowledge and trust. Of course, this is what we're going to talk about, and so these are just to give you a frame of reference as to what the subject is about, but we want to explore all of this and more. And the central question that we're going to pose, if you could bring up our second slide, to our panelists is, as you can see here, centralized or decentralized data systems, which better supports research and innovation. And I hope our panelists will help us to deepen our understanding of the question and, of course, perspectives on it. So thanks, Bipin, you could take that down for the moment. But as you can see, From our little abbreviated definitions, there are many features and characteristics of how we describe these two types of systems and what it means for us as a country, a research ecosystem, and how we compete and add value to society going forward. We're going to hear a lot of views today, and we have a very interesting, dynamic panel who are going to explore what might be the optimum data system to enable research, innovation, and success across Canada's agri-food system, but we're going to bring in perspectives from adjacent sectors as we do so. Um, our panel, their experience, perspective from using, managing, designing data systems is really what we're going to tap into them about. And then we want to hear from you. And so for the audience who are with us today, we're going to be taking questions through the Q&A feature. And you're going to be prompted this as we go through this using the chat line, and you'll be able to communicate an opinion or a question to each panelist, any panelist, or just generally. The audience, you will upvote a question, and so that will help us rank what we should cover. But hopefully we can get to as many, or if not all, of the comments or questions as we can. So we will also have a few more polls to probe a little bit about what you think are some of the issues, and then we're going to have a concluding poll just before we wrap up in less than an hour and a half time. So that's basic lay of the land. I'm going to introduce the panel. We're going to have some opening comments, have a little bit of discussion, and then really look to your questions or comments to bring us over the finish line, if you will, toward the end of the call. Okay, so to our panel, I'm just delighted that we have such a robust group of folks here that we can get into these issues. And I'd like to introduce Mathia Alatini, the Grand Chief Counsel of Yukon First Nations and AFN Yukon Regional Chief. Nice to have you with us. Susanna Hollander, Interim Vice President, Research and Innovation with Genome British Columbia. Hi, Susanna. We have Claude Robert, Principal Investigator, Climate Smart Data Collaboration Center, and Director of Genovelia, the newly established data hub for non-human genomics at University Laval. Hello, Claude. We have Michael Schull, who's the CEO of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. He's going to kick off our remarks shortly. Hello, Michael. And then we have Steve Webb, who's the former CEO of the Global Institute for Food Security. Delighted to have you here with us, Steve. So that's the panel. And as you can see, we got some very interesting people who will help share some perspectives. But what I'm going to do right now is actually turn it right over to Michael Schull, who's going to seed the discussion for us, and then to really just kick it off. So, Michael, over to you, and thank you for taking time. I don't know if you're on mute or
Have I
there.
muted myself properly now? Okay.
You're all set.
Somebody had to make that mistake, so I did it first. Um, well, thank you, David, and thank you to the Canadian Science Policy Center for the invitation to participate in this workshop. I'm really looking forward to a great discussion and Q&A session. Um, I'm going to probably speak a little bit more about infrastructure. I mean, data, I think, is part of infrastructure, but given the role that the Digital Research Alliance Canada plays, we play somewhat of a broader infrastructure role. So I'd like to maybe start by telling you a little bit about the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Um, DRAC is a national public sector organization funded by the federal government. And our job really is to invest, coordinate, and operate digital research infrastructure, or DRI, across the country to support broadly all areas of public sector research, be it agriculture, zoology, astrophysics, healthcare, material science, you name it. So what we mean by digital research infrastructure is essentially supercomputer infrastructure that includes what you need, for example, for artificial intelligence computation. It includes also research software, as well as data and data platforms, and then research access and research support services to be able to use all of that infrastructure. Now, the A in DRAC stands for Alliance, and we work closely with regional compute organizations across Canada, universities, the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and the Tri-Councils, as well as provincial governments and the federal government to develop and deliver on Canada's ambitions in this space. And the challenge that Canada faces today is common to just about every other country in the world working in this space. We're all investing in compute, we're all chasing larger and faster systems, and we're all needing more specialized AI data centers. And more recently, this challenge has been compounded by new threats to our sovereignty. So, as we navigate this moment, which the Prime Minister has described as a rupture, not a transition, we're seeing major efforts to strengthen Canada's sovereignty by the federal government, including significant investments in digital research infrastructure and artificial intelligence. Now, while Canada was once at the forefront of AI research, today we're really struggling to keep pace as countries and hyperscalers invest billions of dollars to build larger and faster AI-capable supercomputers. And meanwhile, the demand for these services is continuing to grow among researchers and innovators alike. I believe that Canada must move quickly with purpose and a vision that goes beyond investment in infrastructure alone to include the data and the talent required to power research and innovation for the benefit of Canadians. In 2024, the federal government announced a landmark $2 billion investment in new AI capacity, part of the Sovereign Compute AI strategy that supported substantial upgrades of this country's national advanced research computing infrastructure. Greater investments in research compute capacity are needed for Canada to catch up, meet demand, and strengthen our sovereign AI capacity. But often, investment in AI sovereignty is thought of only in terms of supply chains and semiconductors. Canada must adopt a broader vision for sovereignty, one focused on our sovereign capacity to leverage these investments in digital infrastructure to accelerate discovery science and innovation, to drive industry, and to improve public services and the lives of Canadians. Our vision must commit to investments in hardware and compute, but also in two equally important elements, data and people. Supercomputers can power homegrown research and innovation, but only when supplied with data and supported by the tools and human expertise to access and translate it. Investment that recognizes the critical and interdependent nature of all three, compute, data, and people, will drive outcomes that benefit Canadians, our economy, and build strong and sovereign AI capacity. As we'll discuss today, Canada holds rich data across multiple domains: climate science, oceanography, agriculture, health and life sciences, physical sciences, humanities and social sciences, among many others. Historically, much of that data has been stored locally, governed inconsistently, and difficult for researchers and innovators to find, access, and share. Investments to modernize infrastructure and governance will make data available to researchers efficiently, securely, and ethically. And today, during the workshop, we'll explore questions about centralized versus decentralized data. And my answer to that question would be yes. In some cases, centralized data makes the most sense, and in some cases, federated data. But increasingly, this is simply a technical and solvable issue. But regardless of the location of the data or whether it's centralized or decentralized, it is always about responsibly making data readily findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the well-known FAIR principles, with appropriate security and access controls, and with respect for privacy and Indigenous data sovereignty. We must also invest in the skilled experts who design, build, and operate our supercomputer centers and data platforms, ensuring researchers and students can access the data and tools they need and treat them as core infrastructure and just as fundamental to Canada's AI sovereignty as supercomputers. DRAC supports a network of almost 300 highly skilled staff based at universities and research institutes in all 10 provinces across Canada, and support Canadian researchers and students to access data, compute, and tools. This is a key asset we must continue to invest in and grow. So if compute, data, and people can ensure sovereign capacity, what will make it Canadian? Building Canadian sovereign capacity means ensuring that what we build reflects the society and peoples it digitally embodies. Data must be stewarded and used in ways which align with and reflect this country's laws, regulations, and values. Social and economic benefits must accrue to Canadians. Infrastructure built with public investment must remain under public control and equitably serve a national mandate. Principles of responsible AI must be embedded throughout. And we must ensure transparency with partners, governments, and all Canadians. Canada is making strategic investments, and we must do so in ways that serve our entire research and data ecosystem in ways that reflect Canadian values. DRAC will continue to play its role by providing leadership and engaging across the ecosystem to advance strategies which look beyond regional or institutional interests and focus squarely on the national interest. This country is choosing how to strengthen our digital research infrastructure, including data, through investment and action. Canada has a huge opportunity. We have rich data. We have highly skilled experts. We have a strong academic research ecosystem. Three things that are very difficult for other countries to build from scratch to replicate. And we are making generational investments in compute infrastructure, which is one area where we clearly lag. National leadership, intentional design, smart investments in compute, data, and people. Canada can be a leader on the world stage with a sovereign DRI capacity that maximizes benefits to Canadians and strengthens our economy and our society. Thanks very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Well, thank you very much. That was really super, Michael, to help frame it up. Just before I ask each of our panelists to jump in, you outlined three conditions that sort of came together, infrastructure or compute, data, and people. And then you spend a lot of time on values. Is that a fourth item, or is that sort of sit underneath each? Could you just elaborate a little bit? I just want to clarify that.
I mean, I think that is I don't know if that's a foundational element or an overarching, frame, but I think you need to embed them in every single element of the infrastructure, and they need to be seen as foundational elements, absolutely. My previous role before I joined DRAC was as the head of a health services research institute where we work with population level health information. And, this is incredibly sensitive data where the need to work with it with attention to privacy, security, indigenous data sovereignty, and so on was absolutely essential. And a recognition that we need to be continually earning and maintaining social license to work with this data. And I think that extends across, it's not just about health, it's really all of these domains where that's necessary. So I see that as an utterly foundational element, and it can't just kind of be an add-on that's an appendix tacked on. I think it needs to be foundational in the design of all across the board.
Well, thanks for that clarification. I'm going to now turn to our panel to come in and offer a perspective, reaction, or thought on what Michael shared. So, Mathia, what do you want to? I'm trying to see you were on my screen. There you are. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Michael, for that overview and those thoughts on data infrastructure. I agree that depending on the data requirements, the centralized, decentralized, it could be either or. As you were speaking, there were so many thoughts. I was like, "Oh, got to add this." So I absolutely think that Canada is all the things. We're rich data centers. We've got this highly skilled. We've got the infrastructure to support data management. And one of the pieces that came to mind as you were speaking is ensuring that Indigenous voices are there at the table. You mentioned Canadian law. I'm from Kluwani First Nation, which is a modern treaty holding nation here in Yukon Territory, one of 11 nations. And those modern treaties are constitutionally entrenched, and there are laws that need to be upheld when we're looking at ownership, control, access, and possession of data. And how do we do that? Because I think a lot of our government systems, our policies are not yet ready to uphold the treaty obligations that Canada has. And that is something that we really have to be thinking of when we're designing access to funding, $2 billion worth of funding. How do we ensure that First Nations also get access to that? I look at the funding from Tri-Council, and there is OCAP is built into some of that, the delivery of those dollars, yet grassroots organizations that are First Nation based or First Nation driven or First Nation Inuit Métis, they are not necessarily eligible to receive those dollars because they're not under an institution, which means that we are excluding an entire worldview in our country that is foundational to who we are. And I think it shows up in AI development, in how AI is trained. I train every AI that I use to incorporate an Indigenous worldview and give them unique names as well. But I think that we have to be thinking about how are we training data AI especially to think holistically about who we are in Canada. Um, there is something that I also want to add just an anecdote about the data that First Nations look to when they're thinking of centralized versus decentralized data. Our First Nation government, Kluane First Nation, has a responsibility to do land use planning. Land use planning in our territory encompasses forestry, water use, mining, all of it. And there's also sensitive information around caribou migration patterns, habitat protection, sheep use, berry patches. Some of that information the citizens do not want to share publicly. So it becomes here's our land use plan, and here is excluded areas because they are sensitive. And it becomes yes, we want to share this information publicly, and we're also respecting our own right to privacy and withholding data. And then flip. So that's one example. The other example of First Nation governments is the work I was part of during the pandemic with all Yukon First Nations and the territorial government, access to timely data on the contraction of COVID cases or the vaccination rates. We end up as governments not being able to have access to timely health information because of siloed approaches. And I think that coming out of the pandemic, as we see the residual effects of increased drug use, all the STBBIs and all of the other indicators of health that come along with that, we are not able to address those issues in a way that is with policy or with dollars because we don't have access to timely information that is aggregate. And I think that is a disservice to First Nations, to Canadians as a whole. I think when we look at the information that goes to Canada through I almost said CSPC, there's a central data center where you send all of your health information, and it doesn't end up becoming public until like a year and a half, 2 years later. At that point, how much of a use is that in responding to any sort of health crisis? So
Matthew, you have outlined a lot of juicy issues there to sink our teeth in. Thank you. I'm going to just pause it there if that's okay with you, and let's bring in the other panelists, and then we can have an open discussion just around what's emerging here as critical issues. So thank you for that. So Susanna, can I hear what you have to say, or can we hear what you have to say?
Yes, so I wanted to start by recognizing that I live and work on the traditional territories of Canada's Indigenous people, specifically the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And so I know that Michael and Mathea have taken sort of the you could go either way, but I'm going to be taking a stand here a little bit, if that's okay with you. And so I'll go with, when we talk about storing genomics data for climate smart research, we aren't just talking about hard drives and cloud budgets, as it was mentioned by both of them. We're talking about relationships, trust, and the long-term stewardship of critical scientific assets. And so, in my opinion, a purely centralized model for Canada's climate genomics data is culturally obsolete. Instead, I believe in a federated community-led ecosystem. Because this model strikes the necessary balance between scientific utility and the urgent requirement for data sovereignty. A centralized solution inherently creates a power balance. For Indigenous peoples and equity-deserving groups, data sovereignty means maintaining control over how their data derived from lands, resources, and knowledge is used. A centralized system demands they relinquish that control to a distant entity. A distributed system, however, respects their sovereignty by allowing communities and institutions to remain the true custodians of their data. Furthermore, I also feel like we must trust the researchers. Those who generated the data sets have to have a seat at the table when access control is discussed, because their expertise often validates the secondary use. A lot of information they can provide that maybe is hard to glance just by looking at the data. Now, look at the infrastructure reality. Centralization promises efficiency, but often delivers redundancy in my experience. When data is centralized, I've noticed PIs invariably keep a local copy. We end up paying to store the same massive genomic data sets twice, creating significant systems inefficiency. I think the path forward requires clever policy, not large data centers, although I agree the DRAC plays a very important role in many aspects. I believe we need strong metadata standards that make data, sort of distributed data, findable. We need data sharing agreements that pre-negotiate access rules while respecting local control. By embracing a federated approach, we don't just decentralize the data, we decentralize the trust, that I think is very important. We create a resilient, scalable ecosystem where data remains close to the knowledge holders and the communities it serves, which is the only sustainable path for climate smart research. But please feel free to disagree with me.
Well, Susanna, thank you very much. You were all sort of starting to really layer in some depth around this. So I'm now going to turn to Claude Robert. Claude, what are your thoughts about this?
Hello, everyone. First off, I'm coming to you today from Quebec City, which is the intersection of the territorial ancestral lands of the Wendat, Innu, Atikamekw, Wabanakis, and Wolastoqey. In fact, what everybody has just presented is actually what we're always facing, is the fact that there are some divergence in opinions and our divergence in visions. And basically, with the CSDCC, we've been spending the last 2 years trying to reconciliate a lot of these divergences in views. And I don't think it's a mountain that cannot be climbed. I just think that Michael, I really like the visions that you presented. I think you placed the word Canada a lot in there, saying that we need to have some identity. We need to have some proudness in terms of what we do with the data. And I think one of the dream we have, it would be to have standards in actually the capacity for the federation of the different sites where the data is held can be communicated together. You know, at least if we could search the different entities, at least if we could interrogate or capture the same type of information in the same format, that would be a huge advancement. Also, when we talked about the sensitivity of the data, I think Mattea provided a good perspective, but I also think it's the same for private company data, governmental data, which are also sensitive. And there's a wealth of data that is probably surpass what we have in the academic world, outside the academic world. And we don't get access to that because of the incapacity to actually secure the data, I would say, owner, the data steward, or the data custodian, or the data tenant. I don't know which word is the best, but just saying that, if that person could have trust in the capacity to share the data, that the data will be used properly, will be used, in good sense. I think we would increase tremendously our capacity to use the data. So I agree that with Michael saying that we need to develop our capacity to analyze and use the data for AI modeling. But very very low in the ground, there is one seed that needs to grow. It's the fact that we need to structure the data. We need to organize, harmonize the capacity to share the data, and in this way, and also have lay some ground, very important ground. And Canada could be leading this, saying how can we put together governance pieces that would trust or would provide trust for I would say, the data owners. We did a survey across Canada from the different ICTs in the project Climate Smart, and it's not surprising that people, the trust issue about who's going to use my data. Are they going to discredit what I've just said? Is it going to be shared with the world, without any proper acknowledgements? People are thinking about that, and I think these are important questions. Went for the Love My Data Week last year. Someone said that from the Federation, the FRDR. I don't know how to say it quickly in English, but the FRDR, you know what I mean. They said that there's actually 1% of the data out there that is actually highlighted there. I think it's not that no one knows that we should put the data there. I think we should reflect and go deeper and figure out why aren't people putting it there. And I think it's trust and governance, and also harmonization of how we highlight the data. If we can go through these barriers, I think it's going to explode in terms of capacity, or to have access, at least know that the data exists. We don't know whether the data exists. So I'll stop there, David.
Well, thanks, Claude. Very, very helpful. I'm going to before I turn to Stephen, I'm just to let you know, Michael, everyone is directing their comments at you because you framed this so eloquently. And I think what we'll do over the next number of minutes after Steve is have just a roundtable discussion. I don't expect you to sort of go through and itemize every comment made, but I think we want a discussion, and we're going to have a poll. I want to canvass the audience after Steve about what they think. So that will help inform what we're going to talk about. But Steve, last but not least, that's for sure. What do you have
Great.
to say?
Thanks, David. Thank you, David. And it's actually great to be last because you get to hear everybody's perspective. And I think that is the rub and the opportunity is the diversity of perspectives and situations. Where one thing that I really liked, Michael, was you got rid of the or gate and you said it's and gated, decentralized and centralized. I am a big believer in that, not from the case of only where data is generated, but where it is being used and generated through the innovation pipeline. One of the key advantages of having a strategy is being able to create competitive advantage for Canada. And it's economic competitive advantage that we are struggling with. We have a lot of money invested in research, but not a great track record of translating that research into impactful market impact innovations. And I think that this opportunity around data and thinking through what are the appropriate data structures and sharing ecosystems that enable us to not monetize the data in the context of the data, but to leverage the data to create economic impact that's beyond the reach of the individual participants. One thing that I would say at the Global Institute for Food Security, and then it's almost like it's great that I followed Claude because, again, to his point, there's gobs and gobs, and that's a big data set, if you wanted to know what a gob is, of information that exists in the public sector and in the private sector. And one of the things that the Global Institute for Food Security is being able to do is to be that honest data broker, that trusted data source that can secure it, anonymize it, leverage it, and audit it so that each of the participants that have provided data from the public and the private sector are ensured that their data is being used for the purpose of the collaboration. And that is a unique opportunity in Canada, and I think a unique opportunity to create economic growth. So I'm a big believer in data sharing. I think we need to be very aware of where our are we in the innovation pipeline? We need to be aware of what business vertical we're in because the demands in agriculture and food are very different than even like something like the pharmaceutical industry. So again, I think I'm a big proponent of working together because we all know innovation is a team sport and being able to reuse data. Data is expensive. And right now we have a wasteful research ecosystem. We generate it once and essentially throw it away. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to reuse, repurpose, and leverage not just the data, but also the resources that have been created to generate the data. So I've had a chance in my career to do that a number of times, and it's been hugely rewarding personally and from an economic impact. Thanks, David.
Thanks. Well, lots of material to draw from. Just before we have that roundtable discussion, if you will, I think we need to bring up our first substantive poll. Here we go, and I'll leave it to you, the audience, to just review that and provide your answers. But essentially, that's the first question is about the most significant challenge facing research teams when trying to use data with partners or across platforms. And the second question is about which measure would strengthen a more connected and resilient data environment. So tick away. Okay, I hope everyone has gone through that very quickly. We'll just another 10 or 15 seconds and then we'll take this one down. And I don't think the panelists can vote. We're voted off the island on this stuff, so what we say is not relevant. Okay, so why don't we take this down? It's meant to be indicative of us. So, Michael, you've heard a lot of stuff. Do you want to just? We're not expecting you to itemize a rebuttal here, but what were you hearing from our four other panelists? So, what do you think?
I mean, I don't think there's anything to be rebutted. I think I kind of agree. I mean, I hate to be very Canadian and say I agree with everybody, but really, I think there's nothing really to disagree with. I mean, so thinking about Matthias' comments around the indigenous control of data, indigenous access to data as well. The COVID example, I think, is particularly powerful, and I think it behooves an organization like mine, but all of us to really be thinking to work with Indigenous partners to figure out how do we actually operationalize these principles of Indigenous data sovereignty to give them meaning and not just have them be words on the sheet. And in my previous role in the Health Institute I led, we did exactly that with both First Nation and Métis partners in particular, to develop mechanisms to ensure Indigenous control over Indigenous identifying data and to develop access models so that Indigenous communities, First Nation communities in particular, could access data about their community. So I think there are ways of doing that. So I think we agree. Susanna, I think, was the brave one of all of us who took a stand and says, I'm planting my flag on the decentralized data. Again, I mean, I think that the reality is today there exists data that is centralized and there exists data that is decentralized. And I, you know, if I wouldn't necessarily say, well, if there is a centralized data repository, we should break it up. We should decentralize that data. If it's working well and it's properly and it, you know, is properly constituted and made accessible, then why not continue to use that data and make it available and accessible? There are other examples where the data either isn't or can't be centralized or shouldn't be centralized for all sorts of reasons, some of which Susanna mentioned. And again, I completely agree that we need to develop the mechanisms to make it easier to federate that data. And it's not easy today. I think there are great examples where there's been tremendous success in federation, and I think we can look to at the genomics field for one, but also, you know, in Europe there are entire multi-country networks that have created federation, the ability to federate data, metadata standards, the kind of compute infrastructure, and so on, where you send the analysis to the data instead of bringing the analysis or bringing the data together in order to analyze it. Um, so again, I think that what we need to do is we need to design essentially a capacity to be flexible. That there are some cases where federation makes the most sense. There are other cases where pooling makes the most sense, and I don't think it's an either or situation. Again, you know, I think the comments from Claude and Stephen were also very you know, well said, and I sadly don't know much to disagree with. I'll also just mention that, you know, I was sort of very focused on infrastructure, you know, compute and so on, but we do at DRAC also, in fact, we've just published a position paper on an initiative that we're calling the Canadian Research Data Platform, which essentially is kind of a platform, and very much a decentralized model for accessing and making data available to researchers across multiple domains. I'll put in the chat a position paper that we published, and we're seeking input from the entire research community. So for this panel and also for all of the all of the folks in the audience, we'd love to get your feedback on that.
Well, thanks, Michael, for sort of trying to encapsulate some of the points that were raised. I think this is a good point to get the results of the first poll up and see what people are saying as they think about everything. And so let's turn now to the first question. The question was, what is the most significant challenge facing research teams when trying to use data with partners or across platforms? I'll just let you take a look at that. So fragmented, incompatible systems clearly being the number one issue that sort of is the number one challenge. And then the bottom one there being difficulty working across both, it's ... I think it's not on my large screen here. There we are. Centralized versus decentralized. It's sort of an encapsulation of some of the other issues, I think, sitting above. But you can interpret that. Just as very quickly then, what is number two? What measure would strengthen a more connected and resilient data environment? And a clear, more consistent metadata ranks both the first responses for both questions really sort of dominate the two, as you could see. So just based on that feedback, does anyone want to just pick up on any of the audience's views or prioritization? Does that spark a comment from any of you? And just flag put your hand up or just jump right in, Susanna.
Yes, I mean, I agree. I also see this as sort of like a metadata trust gap that we're having. And some of it is due to the fact that we're generating massive high-value data sets, and that's the same for genomics too, but we're failing to adequately describe them. And that's one of the major issues that we see. And so even if we go with a decentralized distributed ecosystem, the data must be findable, interoperable, and reusable. Accessible is also one. So basically the FAIR principles that Michael mentioned before. Currently, it is rarely any of those things, though, beyond the initial project team. And so it goes back to Stephen's point about sharing data. It is key. We're very much an advocate of open science at Genome BC as well. And so we have to make sure that we don't just fund the data generation, but we also treat the data curation as an important task there.
Yeah, and would anyone else like to jump in on any of the feedback that was prompted by the survey? Or yes, Claude.
I agree with what just Susanna just said. I mean, what we found in our journey with the CSDCC is that some field they do have a already structured schemas, or at least they know which minimal field they need to collect, for each of their data. But for other types or other field of its investigations, there's nothing. And basically, in some cases, we saw that it was useful to have, I would say, a stern or a fixed or a very rigid structure to collect the data and which data types. And in other fields, it's not a good thing, because I mean you're changing some from study to study. You may be still studying dairy cows, but you're not going to be studying the same thing as the dairy cows, so you're not collecting the same type of information. So we found ourselves in the place where some really do like a rigid system and some do like flexibility. So, but again, it's not a mountain that cannot be climbed. I think we can offer some flexibility. We can probably provide some cues on which how to name the data at least, or how to try to steer people into using the same kind of format, which will enhance the interoperability between the data set.
Thanks
I'll
very much.
stop there.
You were all very pragmatic because you're all weighing the benefits and pros and cons each of the two systems. Michael, did you want to jump in?
Well, just to say on this point about sort of standards and metadata, so I think actually it clearly is critical, because you can't, it's otherwise you don't know whether it's apples to apples or apples to oranges. But I think it's really important that we develop incentives so that this can be driven by the researchers in particular domains who know this data best. I mean, this can't be developed by an external organization like mine, or some university group that comes out and says we're developing metadata standards across agriculture and zoology and astro. I mean, it makes no sense. And even within health, you can think of like genomics versus other forms of health data where this needs to be self-organized to some extent. But so how do you do that? Like how do you create incentives for that? Well, I think it's a bit of carrot and stick. So on the one hand, I think, there's not a lot of academic credit that goes to researchers who develop the kind of methodologies and standards that are so critical, right? These are fantastically useful foundational elements, and yet your dean will say, "Well, great, but how many publications did he get?" Right? And journals don't want to publish this kind of thing, and so. Like we have to think about the incentives that exist right now for academics, which are often misaligned with what we actually want them to be doing. That's one thing. The second thing is, the CIHR, well, the Tri-Councils generally now are increasingly requiring like research data management plans and so on. And that, I think there needs to be probably more emphasis on sharing data. Like, you know what, public dollars paid for you to collect that data. You got to share it. And yes, there need to be rules around that. And we need to ensure that there's credit for where credit's due and so on. But it shouldn't be like, well, it's my data and I can sit on it forever because I don't, I just don't want to share it. I think you need some degree of exclusive use for some period of time, a couple of years or something after you've worked with a data set or collected a data set so that you can get credit for it. But ultimately, there needs to be sharing. So that's maybe a stick, a little bit. You have to do these things, and we have to build on the infrastructure side. We need to build the ability, the environments where that data can be readily shared. And then, funding. Who's funding this? So again, this goes back to a little bit of when I talked about incentives. I think we need to figure out mechanisms so that this actually is getting funded, and in particular, so that we better align sources of funding across. You think about Tri-Council, CFI, governments who fund this kind of data collection and for scientific purposes. But it's not just science, right? I mean, this data is often being collected by systems, whether it's a health system, or whether it's a forestry system that's collecting data in the forest, or climate data that's being collected. Like there are ways that these data are being collected, and we could likely do a better job of aligning what we're spending to make it reusable more easily.
Um, Thank you very much, Michael. I've got a couple hands up. Claude, is that a residual hand up, or or you want to make a new comment? And then we have Mathea up, and then I want to get to some of the questions in the column. So, Claude, were you building on what Michael was where he was going? You're on mute, by the way. And then
I'm
we'll go
sorry.
to
I'm
Mathea.
sorry. Yes, I wanted to also say that I would take also a stand, Michael, and I would say that I'd like to say that data visibility, or at least the existence of the data, should be known uh, basically on day one of the project. At least what are you going to collect, and why, and what, the information should be visible. I'm not saying the data should be. What I'm saying is that the existence of the data should be visible. At least it would be a leverage. Like Stephen was saying, you could use the data as something to leverage, and at least we would be able to leverage it. And also, there's another point to it, is that we academics tend to publish only the data that is associated with the publication. So all the complementary data of the other fields that are in there, we often don't never publish them. So basically, at least if people know that they exist, we could at least leverage that. And finally, I would say that instead of well, in complement with the stick and the carrot, remember a few years back when genomics was starting, 20 years back, people didn't budget any bioinformatics. We don't budget for data structure. We don't budget for data curation. We don't budget for anything like that. But I think it should be aligned in the budget.
Yeah, thanks. Very, very interesting point. Mathea, do you want to speak on some of this?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with so many points that are being made, and I maybe just flag a couple of uh, items. The interoperability, like the federating data challenge, that interoperability between data sets is something that we have faced quite a bit. So here in the Yukon, we have been doing wastewater monitoring came out of the COVID work. So wastewater monitoring has a lot of public information. And how much information do we actually share because of our small population? And that becomes a constant challenge, is that how do we anonymize data if it is going to be producing animosities or creating stereotypes? If Yeah, especially in wastewater, because it can show absolutely everything about a population. So we ended up taking wastewater information and trying to indigenize a worldview using data that's publicly available. So creating a One Health approach. So using wastewater data, using environmental water monitoring data, the health of people, so all the delayed public information that's showing up, and building something that actually translates the information that's there into something, a picture of what health of a community looks like. And I think that is that piece around translating research into impactful economic advantage. It's not just the economic advantage, because if we don't have healthy people, and if we don't create policies to address the health systems, and if we don't create programs that can fund and support those health systems, then we're at an economic disadvantage in this country. And being able to see a picture of health of community, health of land, health of water, health of the people is absolutely integral to moving uh, to being a thriving country, really. And how do we do that with access to data? And so many of those challenges around anonymizing interoperability of data is something that we faced absolutely every day. And then being able to have that timely access to information. The other piece, and then I'll hand it over, is acknowledging First Nation data sources. So does it have to be published and go through an academic institution to be acknowledged as scientific data? I say no, because our nations produce information constantly around environmental monitoring, around wildlife monitoring, around public health information. And that information is quickly translated into how do we save lives? How do we manage these populations? And I think that is what we're missing from the larger scale national purview of public response.
Mathei, your answer is really interesting because I was rereading the question on trust and social license in the chat box, and I want to try to link the two. I mean, at risk of paraphrasing, but really, you're helping us understand how your communities are and your work is taking that holistic view to show broad value of data, as you said, for health, environmental, for water, so that people wouldn't see the water information, wastewater information, as a potential threat to privacy and other things. So, can we? So, is there a lesson learned here that we can take into data management trust, earning societal trust about how we manage data and systems?
Yeah.
Can we
I'll
learn?
g-
How do we learn from that?
I think there is so time. Trust is only built over time. We ended up doing, so One Yukon, I put the link to the dashboard and everything, the TrueNet eDNA, which is partially funded by Genome BC. Thank you. Um, the uh, the data agreements, the data sharing agreements that we have between the First Nation governments, the adjacent municipality, which owns the infrastructure, and One Yukon are unique data agreements that were built by the nation, and with Health Canada as well, and the Public Health Agency of Canada, National Microbiology Lab. How do we build up that data security? So you have to get the community used to being able to see the information. How do they translate it? How does it get used? And that takes time. That took about a year and a half in most of those cases. And then from there, it is okay, we've had these conversations with community. How do we actually build up the trust within community that there's a reliance on this information, that we know what it's saying, and we're okay with being able to share this out to the greater population.
Would
So
it be fair to say that you've taken a live process around governance as
mhm,
opposed to a one-time conversation and, here's how we're going to improve transparency and but rather you're taking it over the course of a project with communities to help build, I suppose, understanding and trust, which may help you adjust how you communicate and inform the population or communities. So,
absolutely.
would that be
And
fair?
that is fair. And the agreement is very values based. It's based like it's not the same in each community. So being able to translate that into a relationship with SFU or UVC and UVic is we have to be able to have their data management protocols and data agreements be able to respect the data sharing agreements from the community, which is a live exercise in itself.
I'm now going
Thanks.
to thank you very much. Fascinating. You got into talking about wastewater and environment. So I'm actually going to take on our second question here, or pick up on the second question, which has an environmental overtone to it. That if AI, as we all know, that whenever AI is largely talked about, it's about its possibilities, about enabling innovation and efficiency. But there's this environmental shadow, the energy it uses, the water it requires. And so you can read the question that's posed to get the specifics here. But are we doing enough when we talk about data, AI in particular, data management systems, to factor in that holistic assessment of the energy demand, the environmental impact? Is that are we doing enough to bring the two together, or are they still treated sort of as separate conversations in many of our considerations? Anyone want to pick up on that a little bit? Michael,
Michael,
I'm going to look to you.
how do you look at it? I'm thinking that's it right in your wheelhouse, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, so for sure, when you're talking about sort of supercomputer centers, AI data centers, they are energy hungry. They require a lot of electricity to run them. So I think, one of the ways that we're approaching this is from the point of view of um, design, number one, like how do you actually make them as efficient as possible with respect to electricity consumption? It's a challenge because increasingly the chips that are being developed are actually more power hungry as opposed to less. I mean, we may be getting to a point where actually they start to become more power efficient, but we're probably not there yet as the sort of capacity, the computational capacity of these chips increases. So you look at so how are you powering them? I mean, that's an important consideration. Are you using, a natural gas fired plant to produce electricity, or are you using hydro or nuclear power to power a data center? How are you cooling that data center? Are you using air chillers that require electricity, or are you using closed water loops that just basically pull water out of a cold lake or cold river and recirculate it so that's it's a much more energy efficient way of cooling? And how do you ultimately design to maximize the energy efficiency of the infrastructure overall? So that's kind of just very broadly speaking on the data center. I think if we zoom back out and think about data, because that's kind of what we're talking about, and the data infrastructure, this is I think where we're kind of all talking about this. I mean, when you think about trying to reduce duplication, try to make it easier to reuse. I mean, all of these efforts that researchers are making to find data, all that takes energy of some sort, right? Whether it's electricity driving a data center, or whether it's just time, energy, and other environmental costs of trying to access data, trying to duplicate data, reinvention of wheels, and so on, that makes a whole system less efficient. So, from my perspective, I think there's some big picture areas like a data center operation, and so on, that where there are some obvious ways that you would try to drive more efficient use and design. And then there are others that are probably more hidden, but may also be very, very important. I think the other thing just to add to that is, I mean, obviously, our focus is on public sector research, and public sector researchers who are accessing the infrastructure. We want to ensure, just as it's a scarce resource. There's more demand than there is supply. And just as there are for research dollars. So, there's a reason why there's a peer review process well, I shouldn't say that guarantees, that seeks to try to ensure that the best research is being funded. And similarly, we would be trying to ensure that the best research is getting access to a scarce resource, and not just kind of frivolous stuff that's being churned through and eating up electrons. So that would be another way to try to ensure energy efficiency. But I won't try to argue that that is not a major challenge overall. I think, to be honest, Canada is reasonably well placed for that, at least in a number of provinces that are entirely hydro or almost entirely hydro, or at least with sustainable energy sources.
Yeah, thanks. I think we could probably devote a whole session just on the environmental connection to AI and data systems. I'd like to signal to get our third poll up, and then I want to pick up then on our other question that brings in a Canada versus the world question theme that I'd like to pick up on. Okay, so this is our last substantive poll, with the last one being about how you think about the webinar itself. But based on what you've heard so far and on your experience, which type of data systems, ecosystem, are you currently leaning toward? So this comes back to this centralized versus decentralized. Just sort of want to get a gauge from the audience on this. I'll let you go through that. Okay, this is a fairly easy question, if you will, from a standpoint of reading and ticking. So perhaps we could take the poll down in about 10 seconds. Okay, so let's take this poll number 3 down. I'd like to come to the issue of the relationship of this issue and Canada versus the world. So we have a question in particular, which we'll get to, but where I'm going with this is the issue of competitive advantage, economic advantage, driving social change, responding to climate change. How can Canada truly define its mark on these enormously complex issues? Many of you talked about Canada's opportunity to define a governance model, whether it's one centralized system or decentralized or a bit of a hybrid role. We talked about Canada's opportunities to really set out markers about how we manage data. I mean, I really want to pick up on Canada's advantage here. But just before we get to that, let's get to this last question because it's quite specific about data being borderless. After all countries are dealing with data issues, and how might we create safeguards for the benefit of Canada and then in other global contexts. So that's a very specific issue, and then we'll come back to that bigger question, if you will. Would anyone like to answer that question in particular around the
I'll take a stab.
Steve?
I think it depends on where and what the data is. For example, David, the work for the National Ag and Food Performance Index, I think, is data that we want to make sure is available, transparent, and accessible, not just to the members of the consortium, but available to create a competitive advantage for Canadians and Canada. I think other data, such as the Yellow Pea Breeding Consortium that was announced in January of this year, is data that we do not want to be made accessible because it creates a competitive advantage for Canada and the members of the consortium to hold that data, as it allows our farmers to have access to better genetics and enable competitive advantage for Canada. So again, it's back to I think everything needs to be looked at, what it is, where it is, and how it best is utilized. At the Global Institute for Food Security, we do both. We publicly share data. We've made available, back to one thing that Claude mentioned, I want to reach back a couple sessions ago, where he said the data, for example, we did the carbon life cycle analysis that was published in Nature Food. Lots of supplemental information and data was all shared. On the GIFS website is all of the raw data, but also on the GIFS website is all the raw data from the very first study that we did. So the very first analysis for the carbon life cycle was ready and submitted to Nature Food in 2024. Or 2023, pardon me. It took them almost 8 months to form a panel to be able to review the paper. And by the time the reviewers got around to it, in getting back and saying, hey, it's good, but why did you use outdated data? Well, the Canadian government published new data, so we had to rerun the data. So for those that want to see the unpublished and the published data, go to the GIFS website, because it's all there. Because again, the competitive advantage for Canada is to be open and transparent and make that data accessible to everybody. Other data, we need to be very careful about how we do it. Another example of data that I've had the opportunity in my career to be involved Corteva and Eli Lilly and Company, two corporations, one in ag and food and one in pharmaceuticals. And it was these opportunities to create an ecosystem that was safe, secure, auditable, and anonymous, that allowed both companies to create predictive algorithms to better deliver more sustainable, safer products into the marketplace. And that opportunity is what those experiences in my career have shown the value of being able to set up and share data and make data available so that you can create that opportunity. So again, I think it's very dependent on what it is. And the National Ag and Food Performance Index, I think, is the best example of data that we want to publish, and not just publish, but make available.
Well, thanks, Steve. And just for you, the panel and the audience, Steve is referencing the National Index on Agri-Food Performance, which has over 160 private-public partners that have published Canada's first sustainability index, which was a data issue, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Michael, do you want to jump in?
And maybe just a couple of thoughts to add to Stephen's. Just in terms of data being borderless and safeguards, I think this is a great. So if we're talking about international data, for example, and efforts to share data across borders, this is a great example of where federation has a huge role to play. Because if you federate data, you essentially are not sending your data elsewhere to be used and hopefully used appropriately, but you never really know. The data remains in situ, and the analysis comes to you, and then the aggregate results of the analysis are combined and shared. And you can also ensure, as part of a data use agreement, that intellectual property is shared appropriately. So, for example, if there is some discovery that's being made or IP that's being generated, you could say, well, if you want to use our data, we need to be co-owners of that IP or something along those lines. Again, I think goes back to the centralization versus decentralization piece, where I think we need to be sophisticated, recognizing that we want to share data. That is a good thing to be doing, but we don't want to be kind of stupid about it. We actually want to ensure that Canadians are benefiting from from these data. And I'll give you an example, which I think is kind of outrageous, but and I know the health sector pretty well. Health data from Canadians who, when they're in contact with the health system in Canada, much of that data ends up in the US because you have American electronic health record systems that are purchased by hospitals and so on. That data ends up in the US. They generate AI predictive tools and models that they then monetize. Canadians might benefit indirectly by virtue of their care or not, but they're certainly not benefiting economically from that. So I think that's the kind of example we should say, no, that's not okay, and we should find ways to avoid that.
Yeah, thanks, Claude.
If I could twist the initial question about a federation or not a federation, I think what could be federated or at least harmonized across the country would be the sharing agreements, data sharing agreements. Right now, it's pretty much a Far West. It's whatever, it's very difficult to find out, a good one. It's often based on material transfer agreement, which is not the reality of data, because a sample, once you analyze it, it's pretty much destroyed, and you cannot send it to your neighbor. But data, you can copy it and send it to whatever you want. So basically, there are some governance, some standards. At least if we could capture the information of a project or in the same way, I wouldn't mind if we say we have a Canadian standard for federating or at least making it interoperable between the different hubs. I think it would be great.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to pick up on that and start with Susanna, and then I'd like to go around the room, if you will. But before we do that, I'm wondering if we could get the results of that last poll just shared, just to see where people are on that last question. There we go. So this was about, do you favor a decentralized or a centralized? And you can see largely where people are leaning more in favor of the decentralized. Okay, so I really want to pick up on where this conversation has sort of taken us. And in a way, I see the finish line in sight here for our webinar. And how do we bring this very broad-ranging, complex discussion into something that we can take from? And Claude, you sort of started to build on that based on previous speakers. And that really is, how are we going to start defining a Canadian advantage here in how we use data and data management systems? And I think much of the conversation has been around design and governance factors or features. And I really want to get everyone's views on this. And because I feel that if we can get this right, This will be a source of to help drive research and innovation and respond to societal challenges, climate and other environmental ones, and economic and competitiveness issues. So Claude, you sort of kicked us off a little more specifically around data standard interoperability. Suzanne, what are you sort of thinking around what could define a Canadian advantage here, data advantage, if you will?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go back to something that Claude has mentioned earlier around, would it be nice if we would be able to tell what projects are starting? And so just to know what data are going to be generated, down the line. And so to that extent, our organization with partners have developed the health metadata commons, and we have an agriculture metadata commons, which is more relevant to this discussion, being launched in June, that we have worked on with Genome Alberta. And that was to design somewhat of a sophisticated catalog that builds on projects that we funded, but also outside of our sort of centers, what was funded across Canada, and possibly beyond that as well, so that we know who holds what data set. People can connect, request that data, and at least have sort of a better knowledge of what samples and data sets exist in the community. And I'm talking specifically on genomics, given our focus.
Susanna, can I just ask you, so this is coming out in June, you mentioned, so not too far down the road. Where are we as a country versus other countries in taking its genomics information and making it accessible in this way? Are we ahead, behind? What's your view?
I mean, it's quite interesting when it comes to genomics. We do pretty well on some of the standardization. The GH4GH has been driving this sort of international effort, but it's led by a lot of Canadians. So at least on the standardization front, we've been doing well. I think on the data side of things, in terms of sharing, we still have a lot to do. And so I think there, Genovalia and the Pan-Canadian Genomics Library in the human side of things are sort of doing more that would help across Canada. And of course, there are other initiatives necessarily for genomics, but in the health system that I'm sure Michael is aware of, like the Vital, where data is sort of centralized, or at least I shouldn't say centralized per province, but sort of federated among the provinces, at least at 3 province level. Hopefully BC is going to be playing in that soon as well. So there are efforts. People are really feeling that the sort of the defense angle is quite hypersensitive. Everybody wants to make sure that we as Canadians are more aware of what our resources are, and make sure that we have all of it in Canada used by Canadians for Canadian advantage.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to turn to Mathea, then Steve, then Michael, with the last word to Claude, just to wrap things up. So Mathea, what's your thought?
I love this idea of borderless data. I think from a First Nation perspective, where everything we do has an impact on the land, I think the AI conversation could be a full day discussion. There is, when I think of our ability to make change or to assess what's happening, we have to really be taking that global picture, and Canadian data needs to be a part of it. I think of the wastewater program that we're conducting here in the Yukon. It's part of the SCORE network, which is a large network of wastewater monitoring that is originating in in Europe. And that type of information gives us the ability to track substances of potential abuse, where it's originating, how it's showing up, how it's migrating through the globe. And that's powerful, not just for refuting the fact that we're not consuming and distributing fentanyl, but it's also really impactful when we're able to see what is showing up that we have to actually create health response in order to offset. And I think that global perspective of uh, health data, environmental data, human, um, animal health data, all of that needs to be integrated, and we need to be looking from that One Health lens.
Thank you very much. That's great. Michael, and then Steve.
Yeah, so look, I think if you think about what are some of the the exemplars around using data to advance research and so on at a national level, the ones that I'm most familiar with are often from like Nordic countries where they have a unique identifier and data is linked across every social and health domain and it's all pooled in one central place and then magic happens because researchers have access to it. So that's not going to happen in Canada. I mean, let's just be clear. That has never happened. It won't happen in Canada. And I think there are lots of reasons why it shouldn't happen, frankly. But could Canada not become a model for how you effectively and efficiently federate data across, a complicated federation, which is provinces and territories, and of course First Nations and Métis nations and so on. We have this complex federation, but I think we could develop the ways to become an exemplar nation of how you do that well and effectively. And I actually think, I mean there, David, you and Stephen come from the world, and Claude from the world of sort of agricultural data and so on. I don't know that world well. I'll be very honest, but it strikes me that that might be those might be the kinds of areas where you could make progress more rapidly because of at least there aren't some of the privacy constraints that exist with respect to health data and so on. There are probably other issues, IP and so on, that have been referenced. But I mean, that these might be areas where we could make actually more rapid progress and demonstrate how to do it well and then build from there. So I think at the end of the day, we need to be ambitious as a country. We often kind of muddle through and unfortunately don't really become more than the sum of our parts. And I think this is one area where Canada can be more than the sum of its parts. And I go back to the point I made in my opening comments, which is that Canada has extremely rich data in a whole vast set of areas that relate to science. We have incredibly talented researchers and skilled staff. We have governments that seem to want to support this. We have advantages that many other countries can only dream of and cannot replicate. What we lack in sort of technical infrastructure, we make up in spades with these other advantages, and we should be taking we should be making more progress with them.
Well, thanks for that comment. Turning to Steve and then Claude, very quick answers if you can. You got us going, so I just want to make sure I include you here at the back end.
Okay, so first of all, I think that the opportunity is all of us. So, Michael, I think one of the things that the agriculture and food space have actually leveraged the discipline of the medical community and how you structure your data around your medical records. So those are things that we've learned from an ag and food perspective of what medical has done. And I think that is the opportunity space for us in Canada, is as the community writ large is being able to borrow, leverage from across the various verticals, if you will, to be able to create a system. I agree with Claude that we need some sort of standard operating procedure. And just the comment that he made, and I applaud what BC Genomics and Alberta are doing on trying to create an inventory of what data is out there or where you can reach and connect with the data through the researchers is, I think, a great thing. First thing to being able to share data is to know that it even exists, and just to know what publicly funded research is generating what types of data, not the data like Claude said, but at least I know Claude is generating data. I can at least call him and say, we would like to partner or collaborate. And then we can work through the details of each of these interactions. So again, I think this is a great topic, one that back to Michael's comment, it's an opportunity for Canada and an opportunity for us to take a global leadership role, and it's imperative for this long-term success of our country. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Steve. Claude.
I'd like to also say that I think the timing is great. I mean, we see elsewhere in the world. I think the EU is getting organized, to how they're going to share the data across the different countries. The Australians are getting organized in different manners with their biocommons and everything else. I think we need to bring at some point something to the table from Canada. So if we look like I would say a bunch of cats that are tough to herd, that's going to be difficult to present. But if we come with some standards, with some governance, with some vision, I think it would be well accepted. Data is a huge asset. I'm always thinking that are we going to put it all free in the public space for everyone to pick in? Probably not all the data. I think some data is sensitive. We know that I'm always joking, saying that if we say where the biggest fish is in which lake in Quebec, you can say that this fish is going to be gone by the end of the summer, right? So there are some information you probably don't want to share, but at least knowing that we know where the biggest fish is in Quebec, and basically, if you want to know, if you want to have a useful idea to what to do with this info, well, we can have a good framework of governance around it, and we're going to help you get access to that data. So we
Well, I
need
think
to get the structure there.
Well, thank you very, very much. I really like how we've all ended this discussion. And I think if I were to reflect back on our core question, I would rewrite the question. And the question really should be, how can Canada lead on data frameworks, data governance to create just huge opportunities for this country? So thank you very much to all of you. We're going to have one more poll that's going to come up just to probe the audience on here it is there, the feedback on this event. But a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to Michael, Mathea, Claude, Susanna, Steve. You really provided a very rich discussion, and thanks again to all of our audience members for participating in this call. And I hope that this will be of use going forward as we think about data and how to manage. So with that, we'll just leave this poll up for another 10 seconds or so. Although there is, you can write 250 words. That might take people another half hour. We can't sit here and look at you, but I'm sure the organizers would love to hear back from you about anything you'd like to have. So with that, we'll end the discussion, and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Steve.